So a good transition into today's topic, which is, can you hear me now? Now, throughout the Bible, there are many different verses that talk about our senses, our sight, our smell, our hearing. But I want to focus today more on our sense of listening. No, it's okay. We're listening. It's okay. We're listening. We can hear you. Our sense of hearing, okay? And one of the biggest verses that we all are familiar with is, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." We've heard this verse before, right? This verse is said multiple times in the Gospels, and for those that have read the book of Revelation, comes in a lot. So when we look at this verse, Christ says it before the parable of the sower. And after the parable of the sower, he's essentially saying, hey, I'm trying to get your attention. It's a very weird sentence, of course, because we all have ears, right? And we all are able to listen with our ears. But what he's trying to tell us is to not just listen. There's a difference between hearing and listening, right? When our sense of hearing is completely different than all of our other senses. For example, our ears are always meant to be open, unlike our eyes that have eyelids, so we can close them, right? But throughout our lives, when we look at our other senses, when we look at what we do with our senses, listening is the hardest to master and the one that we get the least amount of training on, right? We learn how to speak. Or even when we're babies, when you see a baby, their eyes are open, they're looking around, they're trying to analyze everything around them. And as babies, we did the same thing. And growing up, we went into school, we learned how to speak, right? We learned how to smell. Well, smell came naturally, but also at the same time, you grow up. When you grow up, your palate becomes different. You know, my palate is different than his palate and your palate and so on. But from a listening standpoint, we never learn training. We never get trained on how to listen properly, right? And this is why, compared to all of our other senses, listening is the only one that requires interpretation, right? When you see something, when I see this bottle, I see that it's a bottle. I don't need to interpret that this is a bottle. Right? But when I hear somebody say something, I need to interpret it. And this is why I'm convinced that the one service that we can provide for each other and for everybody else, whether they're family or strangers or just an acquaintance or whoever it is, the best service of love that we can show another person is to give them 100% of our listening. You know, we always see on these shows, the husband is always sitting down doing something and the wife is yelling something in the background, and then she yells, "Are you listening to me?" Right? That's the type of thing that when you look at it, we want to completely do the opposite, right? When I sit in front of somebody and I give them 100% of my listening focus, right? Meaning I'm all theirs right now. That is the best kind of love that we can give to anybody, right? At the same time, it is almost, as humans, it is impossible to give 100% of our listening. And that's why listening or hearing is the most difficult sense to master, right? Because it gets overpowered by every other sense, right? I'm sure some of you can relate to this, where you may be having a conversation with somebody and your eye catches maybe somebody walking down the hall, right? For that moment, you lose that focus with the person you're listening to, right? This just happened to me recently. I was very hungry and I was talking with somebody and all I could smell was freshly baked muffins. And I don't know why, there was no muffins around, but all I could smell was muffins, and I wanted a muffin, right? But it distracted my sense of being focused to the person, and it got me in trouble because then they were just like, so, what do you think? And I said, yeah, sure, and then this is how I ended up here, okay? Okay, so again, when we look at, even people in meetings, those that go to professional meetings, a lot of people we see doodle in their notebooks that's a distraction. I do it all the time. I will sit there and I'll doodle something, and then somebody will ask me a question, and sometimes I'm able to catch what they're trying to say, and sometimes you're not. But we're never giving that 100% focus. Even if you sit in front of them and there's no distractions, there's always something inside of you that is going to distract, right? And that's why being able to sit in front of somebody and give them that love, the love of being able to focus just on them, is the greatest kind of love we can give. Whether, again, if it's your spouse, your sibling, your acquaintance, or even somebody you just bump into on the street, right? It becomes so much more important to them that you are pushing away all these other senses that are distracting you and focusing directly on them, right? But again, Christ emphasizes a lot the importance of listening. And he's talking about listening. He's not talking about hearing. You can hear me, doesn't necessarily mean you're listening to me. Okay? We hear terms like I'm all ears, right? Those type of terms, they tend to make people feel like, okay, they're paying attention to me, right? Until you start smelling the muffins again, okay? Yes? When I listen, I do it out of love. When I let myself be distracted by my other senses, and we hear this a lot, the purpose of fasting. What is the purpose of fasting? The purpose of fasting is, in one retrospect, is to be able to control your body, to have that control over your body, right? And this is essentially the same thing. When you focus on somebody and you can control your other senses, that to the point where you're able to sit in front of this person and just focus on them completely, they feel that love. Okay? I'm sorry. Okay. Right? But when that happens, when somebody talks about service, they talk about a service that bears fruit. Right? How does listening to somebody bear fruit, right? And the truth of the matter is when it comes down to it, love is contagious, right? A lot of the sermons that I listen to always mention that they always bring up, they will know we are Christians by our love, right? So when we show our love, that becomes contagious. That person then wants to show that love, right? So they will become better listeners to the next person, or even to you. Some of the best relationships I've ever had were because of a friend that was able to sit down in front of me and listen to me rant for 20 minutes. And I'm sure each and every one of you can say you have a friend like that when you are having a rough time, you can sit in front of them and just rant and rant and rant and rant, and they will be focused on you, right? So, I mentioned earlier that I felt that it's listening is the best service and is the hardest to master. And the truth is when you bear fruit and you pass it on, it's a fruit that you could share with a lot of people. So I'll give you, as an example, this happened to me a few years ago as Father Thomas just mentioned. I'm from Calgary, and I moved to Calgary in 2006. When I was there, it was the middle of winter, and it was the hottest winter in Calgary's history. You know, and for those that have ever been to Calgary, that doesn't happen very often, okay? It's mainly snowing most of the time. You might get a few weekends in the summer that are good. But I had one weekend it was absolutely beautiful. So I decided I wanted to get to know the youth from the church, so I invited them over to my house for a barbecue. And it was the hottest day. It was the hottest day. And all I can picture is growing up, and on those hot days, my mom used to come and put this bowl of freshly cut watermelon on the table. You know the watermelon I'm talking about, the one that's really red? You look at it and your mouth starts to water, and it's just refreshing biting into it. It's cold, right? That's what I wanted to do to my friends that were coming over. Now, again, like I said, I moved out of my parents' house and moved directly to Calgary, so I have never bought a watermelon in my life. So I went and I picked up the stuff for the barbecue, and I'm sitting in the produce aisle, and I start to stock the watermelon pile. I had no idea how I was going to approach this. And then I said, okay, I got the guts, and I went up to it. And this lady came up and stood next to me. And she looked at me, and I looked at her. And then I said, okay, I'm just going to do what she does. So she picked up a watermelon. She started to go like this. I picked up a watermelon. It started to go like this. She started to examine the watermelon. So I didn't know what I was looking for, but I started to examine the watermelon, right? She smelled it, so I smelled it. Okay, it smelled okay. Then she did the weirdest thing. For those that have ever bought a watermelon before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. She put it up to her ear and went. So, I was like, okay. So I put it up to my ear and I started tapping, okay? She used, for those that have done this before, know why you do this. Me, being a first-time watermelon buyer, did not know why she was doing this. But I did it anyway, up to my ear. Okay, I don't hear anything. I guess she's trying to figure out if there's something inside, if it's going to knock back, or I don't know, right? So I just took the watermelon that was with me, right? Again, when I talk about the importance of not just listening, but understanding what you are listening to, this is where a life lesson became very important to me, where this watermelon brought me to my knees. Because I went home and I cut into this watermelon, and it didn't look anything like the watermelon my mom used to serve me. This thing was white from the edge straight to the middle. It was bitter when I bit into it, right? And that's why listening and the sense of listening and understanding what you are listening to is most important, you know? And if you don't understand, there are people around to ask. I should have asked that lady, hey, can you help me pick a watermelon? But I didn't. I was listening to something that I did not understand. And what happened with that? When I did not understand it and I shared it, it was something that I could not share with my friends. It wasn't good enough but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. Glory be to God forever. Amen.
All right, any questions? No questions? You can't say that. It doesn't work that way. And so, yeah, does anybody know about the watermelon? Like, do we just like pretend like we know what we're doing when we hit the watermelon? Yeah. That's one way.
You should buy it pre-cut.
Okay.
Yeah, buy it pre-cut.
Any questions or comments about listening or hearing Now that we know Mano's weakness, which is muffins, all we have to do, anybody need anything from Mano is muffin. My weakness is not muffins, so don't bring me muffins. It's chocolate or steak. It's one or the other. Any questions or comments? Oh, right there. Go ahead.
Howdy. Okay, when I first read about the topic, it says, "Can you hear me?" So, and also it relates to, hi. It relates to what you're saying. A lot of time we don't, as humans, we tend to not hear God until we want to. You know, we don't tend to hear God until we're desperate. Okay, so, or until we're ready to see it. So it's really interesting. I thought when I read "Can you hear me now?" I thought it's like, okay, you've been through all this struggle yourself. Are you ready to hear me now? You know? And it's the same idea for like learning from a teacher or learning from a friend. You know, if we're not fully focused, like eventually they're going to be like, "Can you hear me now? Are you ready? Did you finish with your phone or whatever your distraction?" So that you can hear. That's it. It was just comment.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Any other comments or questions before we head out? Yeah. Well, you know what Abuna Bishoy says, right? Father Bishoy says, if there's no questions, it's one or two things. Either yes, you understood everything, or you understood nothing. It's one or the other. So I'm going with the latter. No, I'm kidding. No, it was good. Thank you, Manu, for smelling muffins and for accepting the call to speak. Next week, God willing, we're going to have a World Cup party, I guess. We're going to be watching the World Cup basically here. So there's no OnRoute, but the hall's going to be open. There'll be the games on the screens here, downstairs, pretty much everywhere, minus the sanctuary. Minus the sanctuary. Well, I don't know. Minus the sanctuary. So, and then the week after that, which is the 15 plus 7, whatever that is, then 22nd. Is that it? Yeah, 22nd. We'll start, God willing, a new series, maybe a shortened series, God willing. We don't know what yet. If you guys have any suggestions, please feel free to let us know. We have an email, which is onroute@smsv.ca. OnRoute is O-N-R route, whatever. So O-N, not the E-N. A lot of people spell it E-N. It's O-N. O-N, onroute@smsv.ca. Or you could speak to Verena. Also, just for the cleanup, everybody just clean up your garbage. And please, if you can, take a chair and put it in the back. We'll leave the tables here for next week, God willing. Okay? Have a great week. We'll just stand up for a quick prayer.